He's going to be updating us on the president's campaign trail there. All right, so I want us to come back to our conversation and to continue with the conversation to do with NASA and the promises that they're making to Kenyans. One of the questions that I've seen quite a number of people asking on my Twitter handle is, what is NASA going to do about corruption? And I wanted to hear it from you, Honorable Kajwang. What is NASA going to do about this thing called corruption? Because it seems like there's no solution, there's no silver bullet to killing it.
We have made one of the boldest commitments that any political grouping has ever made since the days of Ndegwa and his report on the public service, which allowed public servants to do business and to do business with government. We have said, and Raila Odinga himself has said, him and his co-principals, they have signed an undertaking that they are not going to do business with government. What we've just seen here, President Uhuru Kenyatta launching an EABL project at State House, he needs to disclose how many shares he holds at EABL, because that brings in conflict of interest. You ask yourself whether he would do the same thing for Tabitha of Keroche. When Tabitha was launching her new production plant, the government shunned it. When other small-time investors are trying to do things, perhaps the president or the government does not participate because they do not have a pecuniary interest in it or a direct financial interest in it. We must kill this thing of people in government legislating, coming up with policies, coming up with projects, and then they become the service providers. Betty, it is an open secret that right now, when it comes to the insurance industry, insurance contracts for parastatals, for counties, for government departments, I can vouch for. There are a few companies that are owned by people who are high up in government that are getting most of those contracts. And I say that because I was in the insurance industry before I got into politics. We know how things are moving in the insurance industry. In the banking sector, banks associated with people in government are the ones that are attracting deposits from parastatals and state corporations. And I want to dare Jubilee today for them to declare that even if they were to be re-elected in the unlikely event, that they will stop doing direct business with the government. The Ministry of Health scandal, where containers were supplied by people very close to the president, it brought an interesting dimension where you could see people who were trading in favors because of their proximity to the state. So NASA has already made a commitment that Raila Odinga, even if he owns East Africa Spectra, East Africa Spectra does business with the government, he will have to sacrifice that. Because you must make a decision whether you want to serve the people or you want to do business. Betty, that affects me also. I could be having my own businesses here and there. It means that once I get re-elected, I will not be entitled as a result of that undertaking to trade directly, because it is a political class that at times twists rules or tries to influence things for their own financial benefit. So that's just an example. Right. We said also that it is not for lack of laws or lack of institutions. In fact, I think we have the highest number of institutions and laws and an entire chapter in the Constitution dedicated to integrity. That is chapter 6 of the Constitution. What we need now are men and women who are bold enough to walk the talk and to implement. And for us to strengthen the institutions that have already been set up, we must also raise the bar. And I think this is a conversation that we must have as a nation. Chapter 6, and even when we are looking at people who are going for elective positions, this, I think the horse has bolted. But it is a conversation that those of us who expect to go back to parliament and under the caucus of Africa Parliamentarians Against Corruption, we must come up with rules to ensure that there is some basic vetting. Because if we don't do that, we'll end up in a situation where government is controlled by crooks, by drug lords, by corrupt people, by people who have benefited from evils and they're getting into politics just to launder themselves. Those are the commitments that NASA has made. All
right. David, I'd like to hear your thoughts, because the other aspect of it is that, and remember the statement that the president made a couple of months ago, that he's done everything as the CEO of this country, and he's asked Kenyans, what more do you want me to do? And, the people who are saying, see, he's put all these institutions are there, the EACC is there, the DPP is there, you have a judicial system. So it's not really about, the president. It's really about the institutions that are mandated to take care of these issues and prosecute and convict people who have been involved in corruption scandals.
Your words must match your actions, Betty. To say one thing and dine with the perpetrators of corruption, to say that you hate corruption and then dine with its perpetrators, you're speaking from both sides of the cheek, which is what the president has perfected the art of doing, unfortunately. I know that if the president was strict enough, just the same way he was able to ensure that the EACC previous bosses were kicked out, he is able to say, you know what, I know you have security of tenure, but you got to resign because you have failed in your mandate. The EACC is an institution, and fighting corruption will have to be a multi-pronged approach. It will have to take the presidency, but he will have to have a very candid conversation with the Chief Justice. They will have to protect those judges who seem to be executing their mandate with utmost honesty, who want the best for this country. They know from amongst themselves, talk about the judiciary, for example, that so-and-so is an abettor of this crime. How are we then going to be able to exempt him from particular cases of interest so that we set a good example? I am proud, for example, about the ex-prime minister. I hope he's going to be much better, not even a little, because in his tenure, you remember him firing then Minister for Agriculture, now Deputy President William Ruto, and it took President Mwai Kibaki to reinstate him, and he had questions to answer as regards the cost of maize and the maize scandal at the point. What we have experienced again when he's deputy president. So you don't know whether he was to blame it for it then. I don't know. And so I just hope that when NASA takes over government, should they make it to take over government, I want to look at how they will handle EACC, which has, in my opinion, been extremely malfunctional. You can't come to show us police officers taking bribes on the road, and yet you do not arrest the people to whom they remit this money to, because the money goes up the chain. So if you want to deal with it decisively. We want to see a few big shots arrested. If my brother Moses is going to be caught with a case of corruption and he serves 5 years in jail, God forbid, I know he's a man of great standing and character and virtue, then we will say, come on, did a minister just go in? It is what Magufuli has done in Tanzania.
Okay.
The central bank boss was fired. Not only fired, their assets were reclaimed. Not only reclaimed, he served a jail sentence. Then you know something is happening. But to throw them in for 6 months in jail, only to come out and enjoy the billions that they've stashed in their accounts outside the country, I think that's too light. So I really hope that we are able to deal with this monster once and for all.
All right,
a quick answer to that is simple. The currency that can slay corruption is political will. It's will. Yeah. And what I will pick out, I've done a small paper and I picked 2 case studies that we can refer to. I'll pick China and I'll pick Georgia. And you'll see what impact political will can have. And the same political will, don't forget that the custodian of a political will in a system rests with the highest office in the land. In Georgia, a president came in 2003. Saakashvili, and what he did, he only started with 1 token action, and it could be felt across board. The first thing he did, he disbanded the entire police force. That is the first thing, because it was the most corrupt. Disbanded the whole thing and told them we are starting from fresh. You know, that single action sent so much shockwaves that you'd found 2 narratives. One would say this can lead to collapse, this can lead to a coup. But for him, he says, no. Let us show that we can get it done. And in fact, in 2, 3, 4 years, up to the United Nations, they acknowledge that Georgia is a country that was able to slay public corruption by 60%. Come to China. China is an established country. It is the 2nd biggest power in the world when it comes to economy, clout, and everything. Right. Even with their tight control system and a communist system, corruption was still their problem. Now, enter this current leader, Jinping, who comes in and says, every leader has an agenda. My agenda would be to fight corruption in order to ensure continuity of China. Did he do anything different? Nothing. It is action. He came in and said, in fact, I remember the narrative in China was, and even the Chinese would make fun and say there are 2 classes of citizens. We have the tigers and then you have the fleas. The corruption fight is always against the fleas. The tigers are untouchable. As long as you are a member of the Communist Party and you are a member in the Politburo, the big, like the highest organ, you are out of it. He came in and he said he's going both for the fleas and for the tigers. And the first thing he did, there was one person who was touted to be a future leader. He took him out, and to the extent that Like, it was so big, it was such a big news, not just in China, even outside China. So that tells you something. The currency is political will. When the president says that, what do you want me to do? That have done institutions. The institutions are a product of the constitution. And we give him a thumbs up. Thank you. You've given money to the institutions. You've let them run. But you see, when you say that and the next minute we see that you have an ability to remove the EACC commissioners, they were able to hound them out in 2 weeks. So what is so difficult in making them work? Importantly, let's look at the institutions. There's always a story that the constitution is a problem. It gives so many things. Yeah. Let me surprise you. That was the case when it came to the security organs. What happened? Parliament amended the law, gave the president the direct power to appoint the IG. Under the IG, you have the DCI, the Directorate of Criminal Investigation. That is a powerful arm. The NIS answers directly under the president. In short, the president has pinpoint information. Can he make them actionable? It's only the president. In Kenya, it is because the untouchable always know that as long as they have their person up there, nothing can happen. So if you ask about solutions, they have said it so well. It is political will, and it starts with the highest office in the land. Nothing else. Magufuli, for the last 2 years, has shown it can happen. I can just add something he said.
Very briefly,
the last 1 week, one of them, in fact, is a Kenyan-born businessman of Asian origin. It caused so much news that these two guys would be arrested over a scandal that happened 3 years ago, before even Magufuli was president. It is so much, and in fact, you can see the symbolism in it, that if the big untouchable guy can be prosecuted and assets repossessed, that's enough. Everything will fall into place.
All right.
And just so when we talk about fixing the corruption crisis, then you are aware that almost 30% of our budget, annual budget, is lost to corruption. If our budget currently stands at 2 trillion, if I'm not wrong, it means we are
500 would go.
600 billion shillings is lost to the corruption menace. Now, if we're going to lose 600 billion, essentially every year, we are eating the 1,000 kilometers of dual carriage that NASA promises to do from Mombasa, going to through Kisumu into Malava and Eldoret, which would cost us about 350 billion. Every year, we are eating the equivalent of 20 level 7 hospitals. So the government that will decide to, one, implement the spirit of Chapter 6. Magufuli fired his best friend as the Minister for Home Affairs when he showed up for a cabinet meeting drunk. His best friend. He said, you know what? I don't want guys to come and say, I did not fire my friend, when he showed that he was reckless. And so I look forward to the presidency that will look in the eyes of the most famous person in your cabinet and tell them, you know what? We have lost money and you are going home and you're going to return it. I love you. You're my brother and my friend, my favorite friend, my lead campaigner. But when it gets to this is the life of the Kenyans. That way, we're able to reduce the 600 billion loss to maybe 100 billion, then eventually to some few millions.
To nothing. All right. So, Senator, I'd like to hear your thoughts as we wind up on the budget. We're now at 4.2 trillion.
Debt.
Yeah, debt, yes. Sorry, debt. I beg your pardon, debt. Yeah. What NASA is saying that they will be able to, first of all, borrow responsibly. But how will we take care of that debt that we have? When Jubilee came into power, it was 1.2 trillion. Now it's at 4 trillion. Yeah. That's like, what, 2.5 or 3, almost 3 trillion up from where we were. What is NASA going to do about this?
Betty, the average Kenyan owes at least 59,000 shillings to Chinese and other, Shylocks around the world. We, as NASA, we are saying that there are instances where you must incur debt. So we are not saying that we will never undertake debt. Even as a private citizen, if you want to own a house, you either take a loan or a mortgage, or you go and work at NYS and make the money and buy the house in cash. But that's only available to a few people in this country. You must take a loan to buy that house, take a loan to buy that car. And many of us take loans to take their children to school, secondary education, which NASA will make free from September. So even as a nation, there are some things that we cannot do with the limited revenue base that we have. We have to go to the markets. In fact, Eurobond was an idea that was that came up during the Kibaki days. And we never had a problem with people going to the European markets to get debt. The problem started when we had to pay off Anglo leasing debt through an executive order. The president going to State House and live TV the way he has done and ordering that those debts be paid. Debts that were occasioned by corruption. The second level was when they blocked the Auditor General from auditing the trail of the Eurobond proceeds. We still have doubts. Kenyans, it is not clear to Kenyans whether $1 billion ever found its way to Kenya, because the president called an anti-corruption conference at State House and rubbished the Auditor General and belittled him. And what followed after was a charade, because it was an attempt to kick him out of office through the procedures stipulated in the Constitution. When we asked the Cabinet Secretary for the Treasury to tell us, fine, if all this money came into the economy, it should have been felt. Could you give us a catalogue of projects that were sponsored by Eurobond? He told us, in 2 weeks' time, come, we'll give you the list. When we went, he told us, no, we cannot account for it because the money was mixed up with VAT and pay as you earn and appropriations in aid. So what I'm trying to say, Betty, is that responsible debt is a debt that NASA will undertake. And when we go to borrow, we must provide accountability for that debt. It will not be the first time. In Tanzania, they also went and borrowed from the foreign markets. When there was a whimper of corruption, Standard Bank is having issues in Tanzania over that. Mozambique went to the foreign markets to borrow. They said they were borrowing to buy tuna fishing boats. Later on, it emerged that they bought naval boats. So when you take debt, you must tell Kenyans to what use it has been put.
Right.
We will continue borrowing, but we'll be borrowing responsibly. We'll be very accountable to Kenyans for the debt that we incur on their behalf.
Okay, final thoughts, David, and I want you to comment on a tweet that I've seen. What happens to the projects like Galana Kulalu that, were already launched by Jubilee? If indeed NASA takes over power, what will happen to such projects that cost us so much money?
No, I am persuaded that NASA's leadership is responsible, that they cannot do away with a good thought, that something that was well thought out, even though poorly executed, must not be entirely done away with. And so I hope that NASA is able to take up some of these projects, because some of them also date back from the time when the NASA leader himself was in government. And so I just hope that when they take over some of them, they're able to actualize them. It's no longer going to be talk. 1 million acres is not a child's joke. If it is well utilized with perfect irrigation, I assure you, and good infrastructures to be able to move the proceeds from one point across the country, it can be able to sustain at least 60% of this nation. Be that as it may, just to touch on the debt thing, I hope really, if we are able to deal with corruption, then the amount we will need to borrow is greatly reduced. Because then we have resources at our disposal locally to be able to tackle most of the things for which we borrow. So I hope NASA does just that, fixes corruption. I hope they take over the projects that seems to have been mismanaged under Jubilee. And I hope they set an example to the country to know that for every dime you take away or you rob Kenyans and put it to your personal use, there is punishment. That it is a country that will reward good and be able to ruthlessly punish evil.
All right. Well, let's wind it there. Kipto, your last thoughts. And I want you to speak to the Kenyans, even as, they have these two manifestos to look at, the Kenyans who are really inquisitive about, what is Jubilee offering, what is NASA offering, what is it that they should be able to look out for?
Now, what I would ask the voters to focus their attention in, let's look at what each of the coalition's manifesto, what seems realistic, what seems achievable. One thing that I would ask the voter to be conscious about is that there's always the glamour, there's always something presentable.
Yeah.
But importantly, can we break it down and see, is it really achievable? For example, if I picked out for the NASA manifesto, I felt that it would be a distraction, a good idea, but a distraction when they talked about sponsoring a constitutional amendment to hybrid, because you rightly bring us back into politics again. And there's something about Kenya with politics. Every time politics becomes the main thing, everything takes a backseat. Yeah. And at the moment, the problem is economy, and jobs. I would ask the voter to focus on what are the pro-poor initiatives that each of the coalition can deliver and can achieve. And it's not just what looks good on paper, but what actually that can have direct impact on the people. Okay. And I want us just to focus on simple things: economy, job creation, and the cost of living. If we narrow down our efforts on that, and we ask ourselves, does Jubilee give us any reason to feel that they will lower the cost of living and make life bearable? If it's a no, and you know, for them, we may just need to ask the question, what have they done? That should be the question. For NASA, it's what political will do they have to put and to push through the same? Because bottom line remains, how can we be able to know the real, genuine interest of a coalition? Can they really deliver and put those that are in paper into action? Just that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. A very interesting conversation. I wish we'd continue for another hour, but we really can't. Joshua Kipto, he's a political analyst. We also have David Osiany, who's a public policy consultant, and Senator Moses Kajwang, he's a Homa Bay senator. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. All right, so we'll be taking a break. When we come back, I'll be sampling some of the tweets that I've been seeing on my handle in regards to the conversation here, but we'll take that break. Don't go away. We'll be right back shortly.